Long ago, on the dusty edge of an ancient land between great cities, lived a young man named Yahya. He owned no land, no wealth, no title. His entire world fit into a small clay house and the fragile hands of his mother, Rabia. She was a woman shaped by hardship, yet polished by faith. Life had tested her relentlessly, but it had never succeeded in breaking her trust in God. When Yahya's father passed away during a devastating famine, Rabia became both mother and father, teacher and protector. She raised her son not with riches, but with values. She planted honesty in his heart, patience in his soul, and faith deep in his bones. But values do not always shield a person from pain. As Yahya grew older, misfortune followed him like a shadow. Every business failed. Every effort collapsed. The fields dried up. Savings vanished. No matter how hard he worked, success seemed to slip through his fingers. People whispered when he passed. Some mocked him as unlucky. Others called him useless. Over time, the weight of failure began to crush his spirit. One evening, Yahya returned home with empty hands and hollow eyes. Rabia saw everything without asking a single question. She broke her bread in half and placed the larger piece in front of her son. Yahya could no longer hold back. His voice trembled as he said he felt forgotten, invisible, worthless. Rabia placed her hand on his head and spoke with a calm that only comes from deep faith. She told him God never forgets his servants. Sometimes he delays, not to punish, but to prepare. That night, while Yahya lay awake staring into darkness, Rabia stood on her prayer mat. Tears streamed down her face as she raised her hands to the heavens. She did not ask for luxury or power. She asked for justice. She asked that her son's integrity not go unrewarded. She asked for a blessing so clear that the world itself would be forced to acknowledge the power of a mother's prayer. Her words rose beyond the ceiling, beyond the sky, toward a realm unseen. Before dawn, Yahya felt a strange calm settle in his heart. Something inside him whispered that this would be the final day of despair. After morning prayer, he kissed his mother's hand and stepped outside with no destination, no money, only trust. Under the scorching sun, exhausted and hungry, he collapsed beneath a tree. That was when an elderly traveler approached him, carrying a worn bag and a gaze filled with quiet wisdom. The traveler offered Yahya bread and water, and then made a request. He said he carried something priceless and feared traveling alone. He asked Yahya to accompany him for a short distance. Yahya agreed without hesitation and refused any payment. They walked together for hours, speaking of life, loss, faith, and patience. As the sun sank, they reached a barren, rocky land. The traveler stopped, removed a small, ornate chest from his bag, and placed it into Yahya's hands. He said the chest contained the treasure of his entire life and must not be opened. He would return at dawn. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the night. Alone in the darkness, surrounded by silence and fear, Yahya felt temptation claw at his heart. What if the chest held gold? What if this was his chance to escape poverty forever? But louder than temptation was his mother's voice, reminding him that betrayal of trust destroys the soul. Yahya purified himself, prayed, and begged God for strength. As the night deepened, peace replaced fear. He realized this was not a test of wealth, but of character. At sunrise, the traveler returned. Without a word, Yahya handed the chest untouched. The traveler opened it with a single touch. Inside was nothing but dust and stones. Yahya stood confused. The traveler smiled and revealed the truth. He was not a man, but a messenger sent by God. The treasure had never been in the chest. The treasure was Yahya himself, his honesty, his restraint, his faith. He had passed the test born from his mother's tears. In that moment, the world around Yahya dissolved into light. When his eyes opened again, he stood before a magnificent palace surrounded by endless fields and flowing water. The messenger told him this was his reward, granted by God in response to his mother's prayer. Yahya was now a ruler, entrusted not with luxury, but responsibility. He opened the palace doors to the poor, fed the hungry, clothed the needy, and healed the sick. His name spread not as king of power, but as a servant of justice. Yet his heart ached for only one thing, his mother. One evening, he saw an elderly beggar woman approaching the palace gates. He ran to her, fell to his knees, and recognized Rabia beneath her worn clothes. She smiled and revealed she had come to test whether wealth had changed her son. When she declared her satisfaction, the palace faded. Yahya found himself once again in their humble home, his mother healthy and radiant, the air filled with peace. Rabia told him the truth. God had shown him what he could give and what truly matters. Wealth fades, power dissolves, but faith, integrity, and a mother's prayer reshape destiny itself. Yahya wept in gratitude, understanding at last that the greatest reward was not gold or land, but a heart at peace and a Lord who was pleased. This is the truth written across time. When sincerity meets patience, when faith stands firm under trial, and when a mother raises her hands in prayer, destiny itself is forced to bow. Life after the revelation did not return to what it once was, yet it did not turn into a tale of effortless comfort either. Yahya and his mother continued living simply, but something unseen had shifted. The air around them felt lighter. Their days were no longer ruled by fear of tomorrow. Instead, they were anchored by certainty. Rabia no longer worried about provision, and Yahya no longer chased success. He focused on service. Opportunities began to appear, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. People sought Yahya out to settle disputes because he listened before he spoke. Merchants trusted him with their goods because he never cheated. Farmers asked his advice because he never exploited them. Without asking, without demanding, Yahya became a pillar in the community. Years passed, and the land that once rejected him began to prosper around him. The same people who once mocked his failures now whispered in respect. They noticed that wherever Yahya worked, fairness followed. Wherever he spoke, calm replaced conflict. Wealth eventually found him, but it arrived humbly, as if asking permission to stay, and Yahya treated it like a guest, not a master. He built wells before houses. He fed others before himself. He remembered every night he spent hungry, guarding a chest that held nothing, and he understood that emptiness had shaped him more than abundance ever could. Rabia grew older. Her steps slowed, but her eyes shone brighter. She watched her son become what she had prayed for, not rich, not famous, but unshaken. One evening, as she lay resting, she called Yahya close and placed her hand on his chest. She told him that the world would test him again, because it always does. But this time, the test would not come as poverty or temptation. It would come as influence. She reminded him that leadership is not proven by how many follow you, but by how many you protect. She said the most dangerous moment for a believer is when people begin praising instead of questioning, because praise feeds the ego quietly. Not long after, her words proved true. The region fell into chaos after the death of a corrupt ruler. The people needed someone just, someone they trusted. They came to Yahya not with demands, but with hope. He resisted at first, fearing the weight of authority, but Rabia reminded him that turning away from responsibility can be as dangerous as misusing it. Yahya accepted, not as a ruler hungry for control, but as a guardian aware of accountability. His leadership changed the land. Justice was no longer selective. The weak stood equal to the powerful. Corruption collapsed under transparency,
and for the first time in decades, the poor felt seen. Yet Yahya never moved into palaces. He never dressed like a king. He ate among the people and walked the streets alone at night, checking on homes and listening to unspoken needs. He remembered the traveler, the empty chest, and the night where faith was heavier than fear. When Rabia finally returned to her Lord, the entire land mourned, not because she was famous, but because her values lived on in thousands. She was buried quietly, without ceremony, as she wished, and Yahya stood by her grave, knowing that everything he had ever become began with her tears on a prayer mat. Years later, when Yahya himself was asked what shaped his destiny, he never spoke of miracles or angels. He spoke of trust, he spoke of patience, and he spoke of a mother who believed that God never wastes sincerity. This is how legacies are born, not through power, but through principle, not through noise, but through quiet faith, and not through wealth, but through hearts that remain clean when no one is watching.